Welcome to Chapter 10 of Social Psychology. This chapter is all about helping other people, what we call pro-social behavior in social psychology. So, Chapter 10 only had 3 sections, which probably made you happy because you only had to write 3 essays. It also means we'll only have 2 mini lectures for Chapter 10. So, Chapter 10 is all about the social psychology of helping other people. What motivates us to help other people if it means that we have to make a sacrifice to our own time or safety? And when do we choose to not help other people? So this area of social psychology famously got started by, unfortunately, a murder. It was the murder of a woman named Kitty Genovese. She was murdered in 1964 in New York City. She was a bartender. She came home very late one night from her job and unfortunately was chosen by a stranger who stabbed her multiple times. He actually approached her as she was walking up to her apartment building. She was almost home. He stabbed her multiple times. He apparently got scared at some point, ran away. She struggled to get to her apartment. She was in the doorway about to go inside, and he approached her again, stabbed her again, sexually assaulted her, and she died. So this case became famous very, very quickly because the reporting of her murder in the newspaper said that 38 of her neighbors witnessed this murder, saw her being stabbed out their windows, heard her screaming for help, and none of them did anything to help. Sorry, I have to sneeze. Nope. Okay, it went away. So none of them did anything to help. None of them called the police. So, of course, social psychologists at the time thought that this was really an interesting case in how people interact in their social world, and they were trying to figure out why didn't anyone help. So the interesting thing about this case from today's perspective is that looking back on it now, later people have investigated this case, followed up with the neighbors, and it turns out that in fact a lot of people did help her, and it was reported wrong in the initial newspaper. So several people actually did call the police. One man called out of his window during the first stabbing and said, "Hey, leave her alone," and that's the reason that the murderer ran away that first time. And when Kitty was dying, one of the neighbors came down and held her in her arms and comforted her. So this entire case study is initially reported wrong, but it's still an interesting case of the social psychology of helping. So it's controversial whether Kitty really died alone and whether people really did help or not. But either way, it's an interesting segue into the psychology of when people do and don't help others. So there were a couple major social psychology outcomes of this research that was inspired by her famous murder. The first interpretation of why people did not help Kitty was called diffusion of responsibility. So the idea was you're in the apartment, you're watching this happen, or imagine that you're watching anything else happen. The idea is that you assume lots of other people probably are seeing this too, so I don't need to help because someone else probably already helped. So diffusion of responsibility is the idea that if you're in a crowd of people and one person needs help, you don't necessarily feel the individual personal responsibility to do anything because you feel like, well, there are so many other people here. Probably they've already helped, or maybe they're going to help better than I'm going to help. So maybe there's like a medical doctor or a nurse who can help. So you don't take the responsibility of helping, not because you don't care, but because you feel like I don't need to help because there are so many other people around. So diffusion of responsibility basically predicts this ironic effect where if you're the one who needs help, you'll be helped less the more people there are around. Or in other words, you'll be the most likely to be helped if there's only one other person around, because that one person will probably feel the responsibility to help you. So other ways that this has been named in media reports or even by other psychologists, some people call this the bystander effect. Other people refer to this as the urban overload hypothesis for people who are in big cities and they see people who need help all the time. An example is homeless people. If you're in a big city and you see homeless people every single day, you get overwhelmed by that and you feel like, listen, I can't help every single person every single time. So you end up kind of building up this desensitization to it, and you kind of just walk about your day and you don't make eye contact and you don't think about it, and so you end up not helping anybody because it's kind of a defense mechanism or a coping mechanism for you to get through your day, because it's so overwhelming to think about, I can't help everybody. So this combination of factors, diffusion of responsibility, the urban overload hypothesis, explains why some people choose not to help others even though they clearly could use help. There's another idea that came out of the Kitty Genovese murder for why people might not necessarily help. And this was an idea developed by two psychologists named Latané and Darley, and they identified a 5-step model of helping, and that's on the next screen. So this is the Latané and Darley 5-step model. They say that in order to help, you actually need to go through 5 steps of psychological processing. And at any step, if you decide, oh, I don't really think I'm going to help, then you end up not helping. So step 1 is, did you even notice what was going on? If you didn't, obviously you're not going to help. Step 2 is, did you interpret it as an emergency? Some people from the Kitty Genovese murder actually said, I didn't call the police because I thought it was just a drunken fight by some teenagers. So they didn't even realize that it was someone who needed help at that time. So of course they didn't help. Step 3 is to take responsibility. That's where the diffusion of responsibility might come into play. You might not help because you feel like, oh, probably someone else has already called the police, so they don't need me to do that as well. So now, again, I don't help. Step 4 is you need to know how to help. If you see somebody who's choking and you don't know the Heimlich maneuver, you might not feel comfortable helping, even though obviously you've gone through steps 1, 2, and 3. You might not feel comfortable because you don't know how to do it. So you might not help just because you feel like, I actually don't know how to help. An example for me is, I don't know anything about cars. If you are if you're on the side of the road and your car is broken down, I'm not going to be able to help you fix your car. I might be able to call the police or call a mechanic or a tow truck or something. But I'm certainly not going to be able to help you fix your car because I don't know anything about cars. The last step, of course, is that you actually take the steps to help. You actually have a behavioral response. So Latané and Darley are simply pointing out that there are lots of reasons along the path of helping when someone might not help. And it doesn't mean that they don't care. It doesn't mean that they're a bad person. There are lots of psychological reasons someone might not help. Okay, another interesting question from both philosophy and social psychology is, what is the motivation behind helping? And one of the big debates is whether something called true or pure altruism really exists. So altruism is another word for helping, and it's the idea that you're helping because it's truly sort of a sacrifice to yourself. You're not expecting any reward at all. And many psychologists believe that's impossible. No one helps expecting nothing in return, because even feeling like a good person is a reward. So when you help because it benefits you in some way, it's called egoistic altruism. Egoistic meaning it's reflecting back on me. It helps my ego, basically. And there are, in fact, 4 different kinds of egoistic altruism that have been identified by social psychology. So what are some ways that helping other people benefits yourself? The first one is called social exchange. Social exchange is the idea that we have an evolutionary instinct to help other people because we protect our in-groups. We've seen this already in other chapters, like the stereotypes and prejudice chapter, that we automatically tend to help people we think are in our in-groups or are similar to ourselves, because we have that evolutionary instinct to help the group. Another one is called kinship selection. Kinship selection is the idea that we prefer to help people who are genetically related to us because that helps our genes stay in the gene pool. So this is another evolutionary idea, and it's that you're most likely to help people related to yourself. So family comes first. and that in fact you're also more likely to help younger family members compared to older family members because they're more valuable in the gene pool, basically. So if I have to choose between helping my child and my parent, I'll help my child. A third egoistic altruism is called reciprocal altruism. So that's the idea that I help people because I think, well, if I were in that situation, I would want someone to help me. So you're helping because you build up this kind of like helping karma. You feel like if I help you now, then maybe in the future when I need help, someone will help me because I've kind of earned it in this kind of spiritual way. The fourth type is called negative state relief. And this is my personal favorite. I think that this explains a lot of helping behavior. The idea of this last one is you help because if you didn't help, if you just walked away, excuse me, my sneeze came back. Okay, so if I see someone who needs help and I don't help and I just walk away, then what I will feel after that is guilt or sadness. So I help now because I know I'll feel like a bad person if I don't help you. So it's really benefiting me because I want to walk away from the situation feeling like I'm a good person, I helped, aren't I amazing, as opposed to if I don't help and I feel like a jerk. So it's really kind of a selfish motivation. Okay, the other alternative is that there really is such a thing as pure altruism, that people really can help other people simply because it's the right thing to do. So I really am helping without expecting anything in return, even feeling like a good person. I'm not doing it for that reason. I really am helping just to help. A subcomponent of pure altruism is what's called the empathy altruism hypothesis, which is that we help other people because we genuinely feel empathy for other human beings. We feel compassion for them and we want to help them. But even in that case, we'll still only help if we're capable of helping, if we think that our helping will actually do some good, and if we think that we're the best person around to help. If not, that diffusion of responsibility will kick in again. That's it for part one. Stay tuned for part two.